A barefoot village girl slipped through the palace gates and unknowingly stepped into a destiny that would change a kingdom forever. If you love powerful African stories of hope, love, and destiny, don't forget to subscribe to African Tales in Chapter. Hit the like button, share this story, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive. The palace loomed before her like a mountain carved from stone and dreams. Its walls were taller than any tree she had ever seen, smooth and gleaming in the sunlight, engraved with symbols older than the oldest elders in her village. Massive doors framed in polished dark wood were carved with intricate patterns, symbols of history, power, and untold secrets. The gates swang slightly open, as if inviting her in. "This house, it's too big," the girl whispered to herself, her voice trembling yet filled with curiosity. Her bare feet pressed into the red earth, leaving faint marks in the dust as she crept forward. The air smelled of warm stone, old wood, and faint jasmine carried by the palace gardens. Every step made her heart race. She had wandered far from her village, driven by hunger and the echo of some invisible calling, until the palace suddenly appeared before her, vast and silent. Then she saw him. Beneath the wide, spreading branches of a mango tree sat a young man. He was tall, his features sharp and princely, but something weighed heavily on him. His shoulders slumped, his hands rested limply on the arms of a wooden wheelchair, and his eyes, once bright, alive, were now hollow, staring blankly at the ground. He seemed to have stopped waiting for anything good to happen. The quiet around him was almost sacred, yet heavy with sorrow, like the air before a storm. "Why does he look so sad?" the girl whispered, curiosity mixing with pity. A spark ignited in her chest, a strange, unfamiliar impulse that made her heart beat faster. It wasn't fear, nor was it hesitation. It was hope. Maybe I can make him smile. The thought was sudden, almost reckless, but she couldn't turn back. She had danced before, in village squares, under trees, wherever someone would watch, clap, or throw her a scrap of food. Dance was her way of surviving, her way of speaking when words failed, her way of saying, "I am still here, I am alive." She stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the palace floor, feeling the cool shadow of the mango tree on her skin. She lifted her chin, straightened her back, and whispered softly, "Hello, my prince. Watch this." And then she danced. Not the polished, precise movements of a palace court dancer, not graceful spins or delicate footwork. No, this was wild, untrained, foolish, and beautiful in its imperfection. She spun until she wobbled dangerously, one foot hopping as the other stomped hard enough to raise tiny clouds of red dust. She puffed her cheeks, crossed her eyes, flailed her arms like a bird struggling to fly, and fell into a dramatic roll on the ground. She laughed as she hit the earth, letting the sound burst out in ragged, infectious joy. For a long moment, the prince stared in shock. His lips parted, his eyes widened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, something stirred in his chest. Then, unexpectedly, it happened. He laughed. Not politely, not like a person who chuckles out of habit. This was deep, raw laughter, broken open laughter that shook his shoulders, caught in his throat, spilling out like sunlight after a storm. The girl froze for half a heartbeat, unsure if she had done too much. But then the prince laughed again, longer this time, freer. His head tipped back, and the sound rolled across the courtyard, brushing against the palace walls like a gentle wind. And just as the warmth of that laughter began to settle, a sharp, slicing voice cut through the courtyard. "Stop this at once! A woman stormed forward. Every step made the stones tremble. Her eyes blazed, and her hands were clenched like she could crush the world with a single grasp. She was the queen. The air seemed to freeze in her presence. "Who are you, filthy girl?" she shouted, her voice cracking like lightning. "Why are you dancing like a mad woman in front of my son? How did you even enter this palace?" The girl froze completely, her chest tight, her heart pounding in her ears. Fear gripped her like cold chains. She had no plan, no words of defense. She was a nobody, a girl who had wandered through villages, crossed rivers, and slept under trees. She was a stranger in a palace built for kings and queens. But the prince, he hadn't stopped laughing. His eyes, bright and alive now, were fixed on her. She could see something in his gaze that she hadn't seen anywhere else. Recognition, relief, joy. Something that told her, you came here for a reason, even if you don't know it yet. And just as the queen could deliver another furious word, the story itself seemed to pause, to rewind, and take us to where it all began. The laughter under the mango tree was just the spark, the flame, the fire, and the full story, the story of a prince who had forgotten how to hope, and a girl who refused to stop dancing. And that, dear listener, is where we go next.
Months earlier, in a prosperous African kingdom where tradition ruled as firmly as the sun ruled the day, lived Prince Obiora, the heir to the throne. The kingdom sprawled across hills, rivers, and fertile valleys, with markets bustling in the mornings, drums echoing through villages in the afternoons, and elders teaching children the old ways under the shade of giant iroko trees. Here, every stone, every ritual, every festival carried meaning, and every action reflected on the royal family. At 24, Obiora's life was the envy of many. He was strong, handsome, and fearless. His laughter could be heard above the market drums. His kindness extended to all, from the lowliest servants to visiting dignitaries. He had been trained in the arts of leadership, strategy, and diplomacy, and his future seemed carved from gold. He was also engaged to Princess Kalachi, a noblewoman from a neighboring kingdom. Their union was more than love, it was political harmony. Together, their families would form an unbreakable alliance, and their kingdoms would flourish. Everyone said they were perfect for each other. Their smiles in public were practiced, but sincere enough to inspire envy and admiration alike. Then came the Harvest Festival, the most anticipated celebration of the year. The festival was a tapestry of color, rhythm, and competition. Warriors from across the kingdom gathered to test their strength and courage, especially in the sacred contest that marked the event, climbing the ancient iroko tree and claiming the golden fruit that hung precariously from its highest branch. This fruit was not ordinary. It was said to carry blessings from the ancestors. Whoever won would not only earn honor, but eternal remembrance in the annals of the kingdom. The crowd's energy was electric. Children clutched their parents' hands, elders chanted prayers, and drums pounded in hypnotic rhythms, urging the young warriors to greater heights. Obiora, confident and determined, approached the base of the massive tree. His heart beat fast, not of fear, but anticipation. Every eye in the crowd followed him as he began his ascent. Higher and higher he climbed, muscles straining, fingers gripping the rough bark. The air grew thinner, the distance dizzying. From below, the crowd chanted his name, Obiora, Obiora, Obiora! Even Princess Kalachi watched from the royal balcony, her hand pressed to her chest, pride shimmering in her eyes. Just a few more feet, and the golden fruit would be his. But fate is often cruel. From the opposite side of the tree, another warrior, desperate to win, lunged recklessly toward the fruit at the exact same moment. Their hands collided, the fruit wobbling between them. A deafening crack tore through the air. The branch could bear no more. Obiora's heart lurched. He felt the branch snap beneath him, heard the world shatter around him, and then nothing but falling. 30 feet.
Branches tore at his arms and legs like jagged knives. Leaves whipped against his face, and the ground rushed up to meet him. When he hit, the world screamed in pain. His body shattered under the impact. His arms and legs flailed uselessly, and then the forest floor swallowed him whole. The celebration stopped abruptly. The drums fell silent. Screams erupted from the crowd as people ran to help, but the prince lay motionless, the golden fruit swinging mockingly above him in the tree. He woke 3 days later in the palace's herbal clinic, the air thick with the scent of ointments, dried leaves, and incense. His father, King Emma, loomed over him, face carved with worry and fear. The healer, a woman whose eyes had seen decades of human suffering, stood silently, unable to meet the king's gaze. "My son," the king whispered, his voice trembling, "can you move your legs?" Obiora tried, desperately, but nothing happened. His legs refused to respond. He flexed his toes, nothing. He pressed against his thighs, pushed with all his strength, still nothing. The healer's voice was soft but cruelly final. "The fall, it damaged the spine. The legs, they will not walk again." The room fell silent save for the king's heavy, broken breathing, a sound that felt like mourning itself. News of the prince's injury traveled fast across the kingdom. Whispers spread like wildfire in the markets, from the village squares to the palace kitchens. Within days, Princess Kelachi's family sent word, not out of cruelty, but of necessity. Their message, wrapped in polite words, cut sharp. "A prince who cannot walk cannot rule. We must withdraw from this union." Queen Yama tore the parchment in fury, not tears but rage carved into every shout and slam of her fists. She cursed the messengers, the heavens, even the gods themselves. But worst of all, she looked at her son differently, not with pity, not with love, but with disappointment. Obiora said nothing. He retreated beneath the shadow of the palace mango trees, alone, staring at the ground. Days passed, then weeks, then months. His bright eyes dulled to a flat, lifeless gray. The laughter that had filled the halls of the palace vanished. The feasts meant to celebrate the festival, the music, the colors, all became meaningless. He stopped eating. He stopped speaking. He stopped hoping. King Emma tried everything his wealth and power could buy. He brought in healers from distant lands, priests who promised miracles, herbalists whose skills were whispered to rival the gods themselves. Sacrifices were made to every ancestor, every deity, every spirit that could be called upon, yet nothing worked. The problem was no longer physical, it was deeper, hidden in the chambers of Obiora's heart. Time passed, and the young prince became a shadow of himself, a bright flame snuffed out by misfortune and grief. The palace, which had once echoed with joy, now felt like a mausoleum. Servants whispered of the prince's decline, of his silence, of the hopelessness that clung to him like a second skin. And then, 2 years later, when the sun rose over the kingdom like a golden promise, something unexpected happened. A stranger arrived at the palace gates. She was small, barefoot, and hungry. Her clothing was tattered, her skin dusted with the red earth of the villages she had walked through. She carried nothing but a single faded coral bead, tied around her neck with thread, the last gift from her grandmother. Her name was Aduni. No one knew where she came from. She was a nobody, a girl from nowhere, yet she walked toward the palace as if guided by some invisible force. And in her chest, she carried something stronger than any weapon, more potent than any magic, a heart that refused to give up, a spirit that danced even in darkness. She would be the one to meet a prince who had forgotten how to hope. She would be the one to challenge tradition, fear, and sorrow. She would be the one to remind a kingdom what joy, hope, and love truly meant. Aduni owned almost nothing. Her torn wrapper clung to her thin frame, faded and frayed at the edges. Around her neck hung a single coral bead, worn smooth by years of handling. the last gift from her grandmother. That bead was all that tied her to her past, to the woman who had loved her when the world had not. Everything else had been lost: her home, her family, her safety. She was Yoruba, wandering through an Igbo kingdom. She was an orphan, a stranger, a nobody. And yet she survived. She survived not by begging or fighting, but by dancing. In village squares, under trees where traders and children gathered, Aduni danced. Not the practiced, elegant steps of a court dancer, but movements raw and unpolished, alive with life and struggle. Her feet struck the earth in rhythms that rose from her very soul. Her arms twisted and flailed. Her body told stories without words, of hunger, of loss, of stubborn joy that refused to die. People laughed, sometimes in delight, sometimes in disbelief. Children ran to mimic her, spinning until they tumbled into giggles, their hands clapping. Adults whispered among themselves. "She's strange," one said. "Maybe she's cursed," muttered another. But Aduni did not stop. She had learned early that words could not hurt her unless she let them. She danced through ridicule, through hunger, through the ache of loneliness. She danced because it was the only thing she could call her own. One afternoon, hunger gnawed at her stomach more sharply than usual. Her energy was low. She had danced the previous evening, but few had given her food. Her throat burned from thirst, and her bare feet ached from the long walk through the village paths. Her gaze wandered farther than she ever dared before. Across a gentle rise, past hedges and clay walls, she saw it. The palace. The palace gates stood slightly open, as if inviting her in. A servant had left them ajar while carrying a bundle of firewood. Beyond the gates, the courtyard stretched wide and golden, dappled in sunlight filtered through the leaves of enormous mango trees. And beneath one of those trees, she saw him, the prince. He was alone, his head bowed. His hands rested limply on the arms of his wheelchair. He looked as though the weight of the world had pressed him into the ground and left him there. His eyes, once bright and full of life, were dull and unseeing. The broken prince of legend, whispered about in villages and towns, sat there like a man who had stopped waiting for anything at all. Aduni's chest tightened. She knew that look. She had worn it herself when her grandmother died, when the famine took her village, when the world seemed to forget her. Something inside her stirred. Without thinking, without asking permission, she stepped forward. Her bare feet barely made a sound on the polished red earth as she approached. She stopped a few paces from him, inhaled, and began to dance. Not beautiful, not polished, not at first. Her movements were exaggerated, almost comical. She spun wildly, flung her arms high, then crossed her eyes and puffed her cheeks. One foot hopped, while the other stomped hard enough to raise tiny clouds of red dust. She rolled onto the ground, flailed her limbs like a bird caught in the wind, then leapt to her feet again, letting out a joyous, wild laugh. Obiora's head lifted slowly. His eyes found her in shock at first. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even blink for several long moments. And then, something impossible happened. He laughed. Not the polite, measured laughter of a nobleman acknowledging a clever jest, not the hollow chuckle of someone trying to appear untroubled, but real laughter, deep, resonant, shaking his shoulders and spilling from his throat in a way that made his chest ache with relief. Aduni grinned wider, sensing victory. She twirled 3 times, deliberately losing her balance and landing with a dramatic thud, arms flailing and head tilted in playful surrender. Obiora laughed again, harder this time, his lips curling in a smile that had not touched his face for months, perhaps years. From that day on, she returned. Every day. She danced, she joked, She clapped rhythms with her hands, tapping the prince's knees, encouraging him to lift his arms, to move his shoulders, to remember the joy he had once felt. She laughed with him. She fell on purpose, teased him, sang nonsensical songs that made him giggle, then roar with laughter. "Your body remembers joy, Obiara," she said one afternoon, her voice soft but firm. "We just have to remind it." He watched her, at first only with amusement, then curiosity, then something warmer, something like hope. Slowly, imperceptibly, he began to sit straighter in his chair. The shadows under his eyes began to lighten. His voice, once barely audible, grew stronger. His laughter began to echo in the halls of the palace, carrying into rooms that had long been silent. King Emma noticed. Quietly, secretly, he observed the girl who dared to enter his palace uninvited, the girl who coaxed a prince from despair to laughter with nothing but sheer will and dancing feet. And without making it known to anyone, he allowed her to stay. But the queen watched too. Queen Nyima, proud and exacting, observed from her chambers with growing fear. The girl's presence was dangerous, unpredictable. She was a nobody, a stranger, a Yoruba girl in an Igbo kingdom, and yet she had touched the prince's heart, brought color to his pallor and light to his eyes. Worse, the prince looked at her differently, not with curiosity, not with amusement, with affection. And when one afternoon Obiara placed a royal bead around Aduni's neck, a sign of belonging, respect, and growing love, the queen understood. Love had entered the palace walls in the form of a barefoot girl who owned nothing but courage and spirit. That afternoon, the queen's fear hardened into a decision. The girl must go. She summoned Aduni to the royal chambers. Her voice was icy, her words sharp as knives. She accused her of overstepping, of daring to charm the prince, of threatening the dignity of the palace. She warned her that her place was nowhere here, that her dances, her laughter, and her courage could bring ruin if allowed to continue. Aduni listened quietly. Her hands rested on the coral beads at her neck. Her heart raced, but she did not flinch. She understood fear. She understood the power of those who held wealth, titles, and authority, but she also understood something more powerful, the gift she had given a broken prince. She had reminded him of life, of joy, of hope. She had given him laughter after years of silence. "I only want to help him," Aduni said, softly but firm. "Nothing more, nothing less." But the queen would not hear it. She commanded her to leave the palace before nightfall. And that night, Aduni fled to the riverbank outside the palace walls, weeping silently. She felt the weight of despair, wondering if she had done wrong by loving a prince who was not hers to claim. She touched the coral bead at her neck, the one her grandmother had given her, and whispered, "Grandmother, help me. Tell me what to do." She stayed by the river until dawn, hiding from the guards' patrols, her heart torn between obedience and the need to continue her mission. The morning sun painted the water gold, and as it rose, she felt something stir within her, something fierce and unyielding. She could not abandon the prince now. She could not undo the hope she had sown into his heart. The next day, she returned. She danced again. She laughed again. She sang her wild, clumsy songs. She tumbled to the ground, flailed, and leapt, and step by step, moment by moment, Obiara began to heal, not just in body, but in heart and spirit. His back straightened, his shoulders lifted, his hands trembled with effort, but they moved. He smiled, he spoke, he hoped. King Emma watched from secret places, tears in his eyes. He knew that this girl, this nobody, had done what no healer, no priest, no wealth could ever do. She had reminded a prince that life was still worth living. The queen, meanwhile, paced in silence, her mind churning with fear and resentment. Love had entered the palace in the most unexpected form, and she hated it. But love, as it often does, refused to be denied.
The kingdom buzzed with whispers, carrying faster than the wind. "She's a witch," one woman hissed to another as they hurried past Aduni in the market. "She bewitched the prince," someone else muttered. "Those beads, they're dark magic," a man added, glancing nervously over his shoulder. The market, once warm with familiar chatter and the laughter of children, had turned cold. Vendors watched her warily, some refusing to sell even a morsel of food. Friends and strangers alike whispered in corners, pointing fingers, their eyes wide with suspicion and fear. Even the children, who had once followed her in playful imitation of her dances, now ran the opposite way, their little legs carrying them away in fright. Aduni felt her heart shatter a little with every sideways glance. She had brought hope and laughter to a broken prince. She had done nothing wrong, yet the world seemed determined to punish her for daring to step into a palace, for daring to love, for daring to heal. By mid-afternoon, the weight of sorrow became unbearable. She fled barefoot to the river beyond the palace walls, the same river where she had once wept alone as a child, where the water had reflected the sky and reminded her that even in the darkest times, the world could still be beautiful. She pressed her face to the cool sand and let tears flow freely, imagining that perhaps the kingdom had rejected her forever. Meanwhile, Obiora waited. He had sat under the mango tree that morning, expecting to see her bright smile, her arms ready to pull him into another ridiculous dance, her laughter filling the air. But she did not come. Hours passed. Fear clawed at his chest. Panic whispered a dangerous question. Had they succeeded in driving her away? Had the cruel rumors frightened her enough to leave him forever? Something inside him snapped. A force he had not felt since before the fall, raw, desperate, unyielding determination, rose from the depths of his chest. If she would not come to him, he would go to her. He gripped the arms of his wheelchair with trembling hands. His palms burned. Sweat slid down his temples. Pain radiated from his legs like fire, sharp and cruel, and yet he pushed. Inch by inch he moved forward. The muscles in his arms screamed. The wheels of the chair groaned under his weight, but he did not stop. Then, in a moment that seemed to stretch forever, he braced himself. His hands dug into the dirt. His knees shook violently. His heart pounded, and he rose. One step, then another. "I'm walking," he whispered, tears streaming down his face, soaking the collar of his tunic. "I'm walking, not because of medicine, not because of priests or sacrifices, but because of love." Pain stabbed through every fiber of his body, but with each step his resolve grew. The prince who had once given up on life, who had hidden himself from the world, was now walking toward the girl who believed in him when no one else had. At the riverbank, Aduni had lifted her tear-streaked face. She sensed someone approaching, but her eyes refused to believe it. Then she saw him, Obiora, on his own 2 feet, shaking but standing, gripping a walking stick for support. Her heart leapt. You're walking," she gasped, barely able to speak through tears of disbelief and joy. He lowered himself to one knee, the stick supporting him but not defining him. "Aduni," he said, his voice breaking, "I have no ring, I have no grand gift, I barely have strength left in my legs, but I have a heart, and it belongs to you. Will you marry me?" She dropped to her knees beside him, sobbing, her bare feet sinking into the sand. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes!" she cried, clutching his hands. The two of them embraced, shaking, laughing, crying, all at once. Word spread quickly, and as always, the kingdom reacted with a mixture of awe, fear, and outrage. Some cheered,
Some whispered, some swore the world was upside down. Tradition argued against them. The Council of Elders demanded meetings, citing lineage, bloodlines, and the sacred ways that governed the kingdom. They claimed a Yoruba orphan, a street girl, could never be fit to join the royal family. They said the prince was young and naive, deceived by charm and magic. But King Emma's voice cut through the clamor, like thunder rolling over the hills. "If tradition refuses goodness, then tradition must change," he declared. "My son will marry this girl. If the council cannot support this union, I will form a new council, one that values courage, love, and heart over blind rules." The elders fell silent, their faces pale with shock. The head of the council bowed slowly, muttering words of reluctant agreement. The others followed, one by one, their authority bending to the will of a king who understood the power of love. Even Queen Yama, seated stiffly, said nothing. Her hands rested tightly on the arms of her chair, but she could undo what had been done. Love had stood up, had walked, and now demanded its place. And so the day of the wedding came. The entire kingdom seemed to hold its breath. Aduni walked barefoot into the palace courtyard, just as she had the first day she stepped through the gates. Around her neck, 2 beads rested, one faded from her grandmother, a reminder of her past, and one gleaming with gold, a gift from the prince, a symbol of her future. They swung lightly as she moved, catching sunlight with every step. Obiora met her at the altar, his walking stick a silent witness to the journey they had endured together. He helped her to her place, eyes never leaving hers. The drums began softly, a heartbeat echoing through the square. Then faster, louder, until the air vibrated with the rhythm of celebration, of courage, of love. Aduni danced. Not the wild, chaotic, desperate movements of a girl trying to bring back laughter to a broken prince. Not the spinning, flailing, ridiculous dance that had once shocked the palace guards. Now she danced with power, grace, and purpose. Every step told their story, the struggle, the pain, the healing, the triumph. Every turn, every sway, every jump carried the weight of survival and the lightness of joy. She held a cup of palm wine in her hands, moving toward Obiora, her movements narrating their journey. When she reached him, she knelt and offered the cup. Obiora drank, then helped her rise. Together they walked to the throne where King Emma and Queen Yama sat. They knelt, night by night. King Emma placed a hand on Obiora's head. "You have my blessing. You have proven yourself worthy through courage and love." Queen Yama's hand hovered over Aduni's head. For long moments there was nothing. Then, slowly, she placed it gently, silently. No words were needed. The gesture spoke volumes, acknowledgement, acceptance, and a faint seed of forgiveness. The priestess stepped forward. "What has been joined here today, let no one separate." She poured palm wine onto the earth. Silence fell. Then the drums exploded. The crowd erupted, voices rising in song, laughter, and celebration. Joy spread like wildfire, uniting the kingdom in a single heartbeat of wonder. That night, in the privacy of the royal palace, Obiora pulled Aduni into their chambers. His eyes sparkled with mischief. "I need you to do something for me, my queen," he said, feigning seriousness. "It's urgent." Aduni raised a brow. "On our wedding night? What could possibly be urgent?" He grinned. "The same thing you did the first day you danced for me. The ridiculous, wild, cross your eyes, fall on the grass dance. I want to remember that you're still the barefoot village girl who slipped through the palace gates and made a broken prince laugh." Aduni laughed until tears streamed down her face. Then, without warning, she began the dance. Puffed cheeks, crossed eyes, wild hopping, arms flailing. Obiora threw his head back and laughed. Deep, full, uncontrollable laughter. The same sound that had marked the beginning of his healing journey. When she finished, he pulled her close. "Never lose that," he whispered. "No matter how royal we become, no matter how high the throne, never lose that joy." She touched the 2 beads at her neck. "Never," she promised. Years passed. The kingdom prospered. Princess Aduni, now queen, never forgot her roots. She walked barefoot through villages, listened to people, fed the poor, protected orphans, danced with children. And slowly even Queen Yama softened, witnessing the courage, generosity, and love of the girl she had once tried to banish. Aduni had changed the kingdom without a crown, without gold, without status. She had changed hearts through courage, joy, and the bravery to love fiercely. The kingdom remembered forever. Healing doesn't always come from medicine. Sometimes it comes from someone brave enough to dance in your darkness until you remember to smile.